Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. I want to welcome you to this webinar, The Power of Forgiveness. Thank you for taking time to check it out. It's been brought to you by Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative. That's Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative. You can check out all of their work on their website. We'll give it to you at the end of this. We've got a pair of experts that are going to help us unpack the power of forgiveness. I can't wait to introduce them to you. First is Christian Jacobs. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's a Brother Be Well clinical advisor, and a lot of the work that we've done for you has been possible because of Christian's time and expertise. Christian, what is up? Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Good seeing you again.
It's really good to see you too. Can't wait to get into this topic. As is, I've got the same interest in this next gentleman. I can't wait to introduce you to Patrick Ma is a physician assistant. He's a Brother Be Well clinical advisor as well, and I love talking to him, either on camera or off. What's up, Patrick?
What's good, Michael?
You all set? You all ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, let's get into the first question. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get at it. Patrick, what does forgiveness mean to you?
You know, Michael, that's a very tough question, and I still learn about forgiveness every day. But recently, I watched an Oprah interview with one of her guests, and her guest actually mentioned, and I'm forgetting the name of the guest. She mentioned that forgiveness is giving up on the idea that the past could have been different. So let the audience at home have that sink in for a little bit. Forgiveness is giving up on the idea that the past could have been different. So I think the hardest part about forgiveness is moving on from whatever happened in the past, right? And the guest is Oprah guess is right dead on in the head with that definition. If we keep getting stuck in the past, we can move on. We can be in the present and enjoy our life, and we can plan for the future. So forgiveness is something we're going to learn about today.
I appreciate that perspective. It's going to stick with me, Patrick. I've always known you, and I have a lot of things in common. My example is also from Oprah Winfrey, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit before we get to Christian. Oprah once said that forgiveness is having the ability to say to the person who has harmed you, thank you for that experience. Thank you for the experience. That's what true forgiveness is. And I'm still trying to soak that one up. Hopefully that'll resonate with me even more by the time this webinar is up. Christian Jacobs, why don't you chime in as a clinical advisor, as a mental health specialist as well? What does forgiveness mean to you?
Yeah, Michael, I think the word forgive has a couple elements, in my opinion. For me, what can you give, yourself for the past? That's kind of how I see the word. Forgiveness is the ability to give something. The word give is in there. So, which means there's a gift to gain, right? There's something to gain in that experience or that healing process. So forgiving is really a process of emotional change and a release of negative beliefs or attitude, one has towards someone or something or an experience. So it's not about forgetting, but more forgiving the act so you can move on and heal. And that's for yourself. And it's an individual affair. And I think the best part about forgiving is that you don't need anyone else's permission to forgive. So you can do it without the consent or without the approval of the offender or someone who hurt or harmed you.
That's really powerful. If you could say that again for us, Kristen, you don't need the person's forgiveness in order to forgive them. And I think what I heard you say between the lines is you also don't need, and I guess we might get into this a little bit later, you don't necessarily need the person to have apologized from what you just said, right? You can forgive even before the offender issues. They may never issue an apology. You can forgive without that apology ever coming, correct?
Absolutely. And that's a good gauge to interpret where you're at in your healing process. So if you feel the need you need that person in order to heal, there's maybe some internal things you may have to reach before you're ready to forgive.
Now, I don't want to turn this, before we get to the next question, I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, but Patrick, let's do it. Because I know there have been times in my life, really, I was hanging on, waiting for that apology. And I was tight, right? My jaw was tight. I could feel my temples pounding. They owe me an apology, and I want to hear those words. And what you're telling me is I've always had the ability to forgive that person before I hear that. Does that sound foreign at all to you or familiar to you at all, Patrick?
Michael, you're gonna make me cry. And good thing we have a therapist on site, like help me. But I agree. I mean, it's like I said, it's a difficult concept to grasp, right? Not receiving the apology that you much needed in order to move on. But like you said, Michael, you may never get the apology that you deserve, even if the person said, "Oh, I'm sorry," but it wasn't sincere, or it didn't come from the heart, or they didn't repent for their sins or whatever hurt they inflicted on you. They may never be truly be remorseful. So you just have to forgive. But I think the biggest person to forgive is yourself, I think. One of the things that my therapist said that I think is incredibly powerful is it always uses guided imagery every time we do a therapy session, especially when I get to a part that's really emotional for me. It would have me hold a teddy bear and, told me that, okay, imagine that teddy bear is you, the younger self. What would you say to the teddy bear? How would you act? How would you comfort the teddy bear? And for many instances where we can forgive the perpetrator of the hurt and the pain that they inflicted on us, we have to hug our younger self, virtually, and said it to himself, like, it's not your fault. It's okay to move on. So I think that's a very powerful tool for the audience at home to practice, hopefully with therapists like Christian.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful tool as well. Give yourself a little grace. As the two of you were talking, I heard some allusions to religion, or at the very least to spirituality. So Christian, I want to ask you this. Is there a connection between forgiveness and spirituality? And if so, can you describe that connection to us?
Yeah, sure, Michael. There is. And I think history and individuals' face kind of tell that story. In a spiritual context, in my opinion, I think spiritual leaders identified how forgiveness benefits them, how forgives benefits their people and their group. So the Bible really mentions the word forgiveness about 500 times. Actually, believers of many religions, not just Christianity, but other believers in other religions and non-denominations say you should, forgive your brother. And some groups say you should forgive them multiple times. So in the spiritual religious world, there is a general understanding of what hatred, envy, grudges have on the psyche, right? It has on your physical and your mental, and your ability to actually have a healthy relationship with others and a higher power for that matter. So in Christianity, for example, the premise that one should, forgive is really based on someone who, paid it forward. So someone that done something for you. So the ideology really is that someone, who is higher than you, whatever higher power that is, forgives, and continues to forgive. Therefore, you should have the ability to do so and kind of follow in those footsteps. So I think those are the correlations and the comparisons and the parallels between spirituality and religion and forgiveness.
I've got a background. I appreciate that perspective and teaching there, Christian. I've got a background in organized religion, not so much today. I'm more spiritual than religious. Patrick, before we move on, I just want to check in with you. Do you think there's a connection there? Christian, you just surprised me. Over 500 times the Bible mentions forgiveness. I might need to revisit that Bible, and I'm looking forward to that. Patrick, I'm wondering about you. Do you think there's a connection between forgiveness and religion or spirituality?
No, I think Christian is right on with organized religion. I am from a background of Buddhism, so East Asian countries are very big on this religion, and there's a concept of reincarnation. So there's this mythology concept that state that if you were bad in your previous life, you need to repent for your sin and work on improving your life and others so that in your next life, you will be forgiven by whoever the God is, because we have many gods, not just one. So whichever God you offended will forgive you, and you can be reincarnated as a human or a better subject. So, like if you were a bad person in the past, you may be reincarnated as a pig and get slaughtered. But if you repent for your sin and live as a good pig, then you may get reincarnated as human again. So that it definitely is a component of forgiveness and religion. Spirituality, I'm more spiritual than religious, because I don't go to the temple as much as the religion sometimes would ask. But we also believe that the Buddha lives in your heart. So as long as you live a good life, and treat other like they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated, but treat other the way that they want to be treated, then you are practicing Buddhism.
Really appreciate that. Didn't know that, Patrick, so I appreciate hearing that. You got the floor, Patrick, so I'm going to let you take the lead on this next question. I'm wondering about a period in your life or a time in your life when you may have had trouble forgiving someone. And as we've learned, you didn't need to wait for the apology. I'm going to talk about one of my own, so I'm not putting you solely on the spot, but I'd like to hear from you if you're comfortable sharing a time in your life when you had trouble forgiving someone. And then, Christian, I'm going to pivot to you in a second and talk about what the ramifications or the negative impacts of that might be when we really cannot find a way to forgive somebody. But first, Patrick, can you tell us about a time in your life when you could not or you struggled with forgiving somebody?
I feel like I should pay Christian at this point. It's like, what, half an hour? How much do you charge? I can't afford it. But let me go get my teddy bear. I'm 33. I am 33 years old. Don't let the Botox fool you. But I still have a tough time forgiving my mother. So for those at home who haven't watched my video, which you should, because Brother Beware has a lot of resources for you. I grew up in a very traumatic environment where my dad is an abusive alcoholic and my mother is not only give me abandonment issue, but also as a master manipulation. And one of the prime example of that would be, I'm still getting goosebumps and my body is still shake talking about it. When I arrived to the US, shortly, just about 2 months living with my mother, she came home one day and she, went into my bedroom. I was sleeping. I was taking a nap, perhaps. And she would, tap on my shoulder and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." And I woke up and said, "Oh, hi, Mom. How's work?" And she just blurted out. She said, "Well, I talked to one of your uncles, and he said that you broke him the other day." I was 17. I burst out in tears, and I'm still tearing up talking about it because that actually never happened. And to be accused of something that is so atrocious is beyond my imagination. I could never imagine that my mother could do that to me. I called my uncle that very minute and asked him, like, "What the blank are you talking about?" I was very upset. And my uncle said, "I have never said anything of sort. Where did your mom get this idea from?" And I have to say, I was devastated. I was disappointed. I was angry. I was in so much anguish. Words cannot describe the feeling I got in that moment, where my mother manipulate my mind so that I will come out to her as a gay man, because she probably already knew that I was gay. She just need a confirmation, and she went to that extreme to get that confession out of me. I don't know I would be able to forgive her in this lifetime. I have to be honest, even though we're in the podcast about how forgiveness. But I have forgive myself for thinking that there was something wrong with me. There was something wrong with my sexuality. And there was something that is not enough about me that make my mother act that way. So I have forgiven myself. There's many, many years of therapy and lots of money later. But I have forgiven myself. I forgive myself and I accept that I may never get an apology from her. And you know what? That's okay.
Patrick, every time I talk to you, you find a way to get me to tear up, and I'm going to apologize on behalf of your mom, and I've never met her and probably never will. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. The similarity I think that we have is I too have had My father's not with us anymore, but my father was also an alcoholic, and he was also abusive. The thing that I couldn't forgive him for years and years was the physical abuse to my mother, and the nights that I spent, either crying myself to sleep or trying to comfort my younger sisters as we're listening to my mom, at some points beg for her life. And it took years and years of therapy for me to learn to forgive him and to realize he was a very, very young father. He had demons, that alcoholism, he could not get a handle of it. And alcohol altered the way that he treated people. When he was sober, he was the most loving, kind person in the world. But I came to really hate him, and I had an inability to forgive him for what he did to my mother. Over time, I learned that, again, that hatred, and that was only killing me. It was only driving my blood pressure up. It was giving me headaches. It was causing me to have trouble in relationships. So I had to learn to forgive him, although he never apologized for any of that. To the day he died, he didn't apologize for that. He issued a few apologies that I didn't see coming, but he did not apologize for that. But I had to learn to give that up, to let it go for my own health. Now, I'm going to pivot. You got two weepy-eyed people talking to you, Kristen. Talk about a little bit the negative ramifications on our health, mind, body, or however you want to slice that, on our inability to forgive somebody that's wronged us.
Well, tears are healthy and tears are good for you. And those are happy chemicals releasing in your body. So no reason to apologize for the tears. That's a great thing. And one thing I heard from both of you all is the work that you put in to heal, and some of the past tense had and things of that sort. So I appreciate you all sharing your stories. And I just wanted to share that, all the other types of abuse that we look at, not finishing our degree, relationship, that we had didn't work out, not picking the right person to marry, all these things have these emotional impacts. And it makes it hard to forgive. So emotionally, it's really the inability to heal from past trauma. And many times forgiveness is hard because we've created this negative thought cycle. So out of those experiences you all talked about, most individuals who have not went to therapy or have not, dealt with their issues, they've developed over years these negative thought cycles or patterns about what could be about men, about women, about mothers or fathers. And so the physical part, you look at, like talking about unforgiveness, usually causes disappointment, or some other shame, anger, resentment, rage, rejection, things of that sort. So what happens is your bodies produce a high amount of stress hormones, right? So this is physically that impact our part of the brain. And it controls our decision-making and our judgment, which is why we don't make good decisions when we're upset. So this impacts your memory and, the brain, the ability to reduce that serotonin level. We're getting a little technical here because it's how it affects you physically, right? And it makes you feel pain and anger more, which would easily, puts you more at risk for depression. So it all works together. The mental controls the physical. So we haven't even touched on how it impacts your immune system, your cardiovascular system. I'm sure Patrick knows. But these are just a few ways how it really impacts you physically and mentally.
Really, really appreciate you sharing that perspective, Christian. And again, we'll try. I feel like I need to write you a check as well. So I appreciate you walking us through that. found a video. We've been at it here at Brother Be Well for a few years, and people like Patrick Ma and Christian Jacobs have recorded a number of podcasts and videos on a variety of topics. We put one up from a couple of years ago where Christian spoke very directly to the Brother Be Well family about how to forgive. Let's look at a little snippet of that, and then we're going to come back and talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Christian Jacobs here, Brother Be Well Clinical Advisor. Today I'll be talking to you about forgiveness and how to move forward. And this topic is very special because forgiveness may not be very easy to do for a lot of people. And based on the circumstance and based on what that person did to wrong you, can really depend on how you your ability to forgive them. Sometimes people go through traumatic things where they've experienced physical, mental, sexual abuse, emotional abuse through a family member, or maybe they were younger and they didn't have the ability to protect themselves. And as they grow up, they build this resentment in terms of where they're unable to forgive someone because of something that's happened to them at a vulnerable state. So forgiveness looks different amongst everyone, and it can be different based on the circumstance and the issue. So first, we want to look at, how do we approach forgiveness? And first, it's that level of self-reflection, right? So you want to look and see if that self-reflection, that awareness within your body. So it's an internal thing. So you want to do an internal dive, and you're looking internally to say, okay, if I can forgive someone, or if I can't forgive someone, is there anything that is unresolved in terms of myself that's making it more difficult to forgive someone? So is there any instances or situations or family dynamics or relationships with my family that's making it harder for me to forgive someone? And this is the first thing to do versus the last, because this will really determine your ability to forgive. For example, if you had a really rocky relationship with your parents as a child growing up, and they had a hard time forgiving you, and they were hard on you every time you've done something, it may be a little more difficult for you to forgive people because you didn't see that model growing up. You didn't see that structure of an individual forgiving someone and thinking that that's normal. So you want to do a self-reflection to see if there's any root causes of your difficulty to forgive someone. And I said this in other videos, is the next thing you want to do, you never want to let the sun go down in your wrath, meaning that you never want to let the argument fester and go on until the next day. Because what happens is that a couple things happen, actually. The first is you usually forget about the main issue that you're arguing about. Second, it tends to get worse sometimes when you let it go over, and then you have the daily things that you do, and you may forget to talk about it, and then that builds up. So you're looking at that component where you don't want it to build up overnight. And you got to remember that forgiveness is for you, not the other person. So you're forgiving yourself so you can move on, so your heart can begin to heal. And so that other person has moved on with their life. Another person is doing what they like to do, and they may have forgotten about the issue, whatever made them upset. So forgiveness is really for you. And you have to understand that forgiveness is continual, meaning that it may not happen the first time around. You may not be able to forgive that person for what they've done or said to you that first time around, but just understand that it's continual, and you have to try it again in terms of accepting the incident that happened that you cannot reverse. And second, that continuation mean you may see that person frequently, and those feelings and emotional thoughts may come up and trigger you again. So it's always continual, but again, remembering that the forgiveness is for you, not that other person. So once again, my name is Christian Jacobs, Brother Be Well Clinical Advisor, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you.
Christian, you did it again. There's so much in that very short video. I'm telling you the truth, right, Patrick? There's a lot wrapped up in there. Let me throw it really quickly to you, Patrick. What do you think about the video? What do you think about what Christian had to say there? Don't mean to put you on the spot, Christian, and have to listen to feedback, but tell me about it, Patrick. What did you think about the video?
Well, you know, he's a therapist. That's what he does. If he take an issue and he give you a broad spectrum um, understanding and explanations of it. And so if you want more, you have to pay him to go to see him once a week, like I do. Different therapist, but you get the joke. No, I think what Christian said is, you know, it's right. You know, it's not, you're not going to be able to forgive. It's a process. It's a journey. Just like I would always tell my friends, like fitness is a journey. Therapy is a journey. And it's not a linear journey either. It's not this. It's, you know, all in once. It's very convoluted and you continue to learn. And, you know, forgiveness is the same line. It's very convoluted. It's very complicated. Like I said, I'm 33 and all of the pain and, you know, hurt that was done to me was done when I was so much younger. And, you know, I am someone who actively seeking therapy and seeing a therapist on a weekly basis. And I still not to the point where I feel like I could forgive my perpetrator, you know, but I have to forgive myself, like I mentioned. And, you know, it's something that you have to continue to do and continue to learn.
I really appreciate it, Patrick. Christian, before we move on, there's a part of that video that you really helped me out with a while ago. So I want to give you an opportunity to help other people out if they're thinking the same thing. The notion of not letting the sun go down on your wrath, so to speak. And that's something that, you know, many of us taught our children growing up, don't go to bed angry and all of that. To be honest, it's been fairly recently that I learned how to do that. And there were many, many nights that I went to bed very angry about what someone had done. And then I woke up 8 hours later, still very angry. I also think sometimes anger can fuel us if we can learn to manage it. So sometimes some of the inequities of the world, for instance, racism makes me angry. It makes me very, very angry. Sometimes when politicians, we won't mention any names, but we've had people in very high office here in this country. And sometimes late at night, I'd hear something that they say and I'd just be ballistic with that. And it was impossible really not to go to bed with that anger. And sometimes that anger can fuel us. That anger drove me to the voting booth, and it drove me to knock on doors and make phone calls to try to affect change. So sometimes I don't know about that going to bed angry thing, but you really helped me kind of wrap my brain around that. Could you take a second and help all of us wrap our brain around that notion?
Yeah, and I think you said something important. It was if, you know, a person is able to do X, Y, and Z. And unfortunately, not everyone is able to process their emotions. The majority of folks aren't able to conceptualize, you know, that concept of, okay, something has occurred. Now I'm going to use the right words to talk about this tonight, for example. And I think, and you can look at it from two perspectives. So the perspective, the political perspective is something where it may bother you, but there's not an immediate relationship with the person or identity, you know, that politician. Versus an argument at night with your significant other, there's a connection of responsibility in our relationship. So those can be handled two different ways. And that kind of goes to my next point of saying, not letting the sun go down on your wrath may not be for everyone. So it may not be needed for those who are able to take a break from an issue, right, and return and discuss on a level-headed playing field. Unfortunately, like I was saying, most of us don't operate that way. How most operate, what I see in my practice is that most of us don't, they tend to forget what the issue was in a negative way, I should say. They avoid the conversation and become dismissive as though it never occurred. But in reality, right, not addressing a relational issue can cause resentment, frustration, and anger in a relationship. So I think when it comes to a person, right, when there's a dispute, it's good for the majority to try and come to a consensus, not resolve it, right? Not letting the sun go down your wrath means you're addressing it and saying, hey, you know what? I'm mad right now. Let's talk about this tomorrow. That's not letting the sun go down your wrath versus we need to fix it tonight and it needs to be done.
Yeah, that's a powerful distinction there, Kristen. I've learned to do that. Sometimes if the conversation is too deep, I just say, you know what, I can't process this. There's a literary figure that used to say, I can't handle this today, I'll deal with it tomorrow. And that's one of my favorite lines from a movie. And sometimes I say, this is too much for us to talk about right now. I got to get some sleep. We'll pick this up in the morning. Patrick, you want a little piece of this? Anything you want to chime in on this not letting the sun go down thing?
Well, actually, Michael, I agree with what you said. Like, you know, how you can channel your anger into action, because the best revenge is doing well. So, in order for us to do anything in life, a lot of time we do it out of fear or out of anger. And if you can channel that energy to do something good, why not? I do want to mention that, sometimes it's easy to forgive a stranger. Let's say someone cut me off at the line. I may get angry in that moment, but I was like, okay, whatever, like move on. There's no point of getting angry. Don't let it ruin your day. I think we tend to not able to forgive those we love the most. Now that's the trickiest part, right? Because we may see this person like every single day, and the resentment continue to build. And my therapist told me something once that's really like powerful. He asked me, do you want to be angry or do you want to be in love when it comes to like relationship issue that I have with my partner? And when it's come to family, he asked me, do you want to be angry or you want to be right or do you want to be at peace? Right? Because the inability to move on and the inability to forgive will only bring you down. And like Christian mentioned, it creates all kind of chemicals to your brain and your body. And the most important thing is cortisol. When that stuff is coursing through your vein, it will give you hypertension, diabetes, you name it. It will tear down your body like you have nothing you have seen before. So as hard as it is, we gotta learn how to forgive. If not others, then at least ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So very powerful. I want to thank you for that, Patrick. Before we move on, Kristen, we touched on it a little bit, but I want to just take a second and really summarize and ask you to summarize, if you could, for us. What are the very real impacts? Patrick even just touched on a couple of the physical health impacts. What are the aspects of us being unwilling, unable to forgive? What are we doing to ourselves when we do that?
America, first, I wanted to say that, all this stuff I'm about to go off of and say, and things Patrick have said, it's all scientific. So these aren't opinion-based or, this is all empirically driven data that's been tested. So it's really research-based. And the most harmful part about being unforgiving is, as we talked about, what chemicals are released in the body, the stress hormones. If you have not forgiven someone in 15 years, guess how long your body's releasing that chemical in your body constantly? 15 plus years. And just kind of do the math on how often that's being released in your body subconsciously, and what that's doing, the physical effects. So that's one thing ultimately. The second I want to say is, what described is what thoughts become things. So as you're thinking about these things for over and over for years, you use a negative, not forgiving your teacher. So you no longer like teachers. So now you have a negative construct or a view of teachers. So thoughts become things. And as we talked about on other platforms, how mentally, eventually impacts the physical health. And, a good example of that is, how negative manifestation, emotions and feelings, about a person is internalized. It can result in those physical ailments. And there's more research that, backs the discussion. There's a diagnosis for it, actually. There's a diagnosis. It's called conversion disorder. It's when a mental health issue disrupts how your brain works. So now you have an issue where mentally you've created a thought in your mind, and now it's being played out in your body. So maybe mentally you may think you're sick, and your body catches on to that, and physically you become sick. It's called conversion disorder. This causes real symptoms, and the person can't control them. So symptoms can include, seizures, weakness, and like paralysis in the body where it frees up, or, reduced input from their senses, things of that sort. And also, I want to say lastly, being unforgiving really impacts the way you connect with others in the future. That's the biggest thing. It affects you and how you connect to your future wife, your future husband, your future kids. It keeps you in the past. So you're not able to move forward. And it impacts how you show up, here's the thing, not just in relationships, but that interview that you go to and the job that you work on and the careers that you have. You think folks sometimes can't pick up when someone's guarded or unauthentic in meetings or interviews. People can pick up on that energy. And I know I've picked up on it before. And actually, I've been that person, that unhealed person sitting across being interviewed. I knew they picked up on my unhealed trauma. So there was just a few things to kind of think about when, we're looking at, this question of how it comes up emotionally and physically.
Patrick, we may have to start a GoFundMe campaign for you and me to pay this man, because I'm like, whoa. and Christian is known, for those of you that know our production, Christian, you're known for giving me extra homework. Tell me the name of that diagnosis again. I hadn't heard of that. You and I are going to have a one-on-one to describe that. I can guarantee you. What's it called again?
It's conversion disorder.
Conversion.
And then there's several other them. There's fictitious disorder syndrome, where your body's creating, things because of how you're mentally processing things. And yeah, there's a couple other ones.
Well, we're going to talk about that as a one-on-one. If you let us hang on to you later this summer, we'll do that. It's so powerful. We do know the power of the mind, so it doesn't surprise me really that our mind can create a reality. But man, you just blew my mind on that one. We got to move on. We only have a little more time. I want to talk about now, it seems to me, we've established how important forgiveness is, right? We know we got to do it. It's hard to do. Patrick and I have a couple different examples. I could share some others. There's somebody in my family right now that what he's done has been so egregious to me and such a betrayal that I am having trouble. I haven't had a conversation with him in 6 months. We used to talk once or twice a week. I haven't had a conversation with him in 6 months. And frankly, we never need to have another conversation. That's where I'm at right now. But I know I got to let go of some of that emotional charge, because if I called his name, I would feel my blood pressure going up. So we know we've got to do it for us. It would seem to me, since we have to do it for us and it's so important, that we could incorporate that into a daily or even hourly or minute-to-minute practice. Just as we do breathing and caring for ourselves, we could think about forgiveness as self-care and incorporate it into a mindfulness practice of sorts. If I'm right about that, Kristen, can you talk about that and how we might be able to do that?
Absolutely. The thing about, the mindfulness part is really the body awareness, and looking and seeing, how the body is operating and what's going on internally, and also identifying the signs. So that's another main component, is identifying the signs, awareness. The story that you all shared, your personal story, you all were both aware of what was going on. That's the number one key component. Most individuals go through their life, experience the trauma, experience the abuse, and then they're not even aware of what happened. And then the family's not aware. Now you're passing down generational unawareness trauma. So understanding those signs, and also understanding and knowing that you are worthy of that forgiveness. Unworthiness is very common when it comes to shame and abuse. So having that empathy and forgiveness are cousins. So when you have empathy, then that forgiveness can come along much easier. So practicing levels of empathy will help you to heal and be able to forgive someone, because a lot of times empathy is a key component in forgiveness. And just like anything, forgiveness is a muscle. Practice it, exercise it, try it on small things. If you're a supervisor or you're a manager, exactly. You're a supervisor, manager. Someone comes into work late. Try and give a little empathy. Maybe they're going through something, or maybe something occurred. Let me check in with them versus they're a bad employee. So we can practice forgiveness in little ways. If some people say it's hard for me to forgive, this is how you can do it. Someone cuts you off, maybe they're having a bad day today. It's called unconditional clinical unconditional positive regard. That is a term for what I'm saying to you. And also, you hear folks kind of brag about how they forgive, but they don't forget. It's kind of like a brag thing. Oh, I forgive, but I don't forget. Or they don't let things go, right? Or see forgiveness as a goal. I forgive this as something to avoid. You don't want to see it that way. You don't want to put that negative stigma that it's cool to, not be able to forgive someone. Acknowledging it, but not seeing it as a cool thing. And understand also that forgiveness is for you, not the other person. It's something for you to take on. Although it would be nice, we don't, as I said before, we don't need that closure, from that other person. And the main reason of that is because we probably won't ever give it. They may have moved on, they may have passed away, they may not have the awareness that they did it to you. So you'll be arguing back and forth, and more hurt and anger will create manifesting.
I'm glad you mentioned forgiving and forgetting. And Patrick, I'm going to throw it to you in a second. I'm glad you mentioned that, Christian, forgiving and forgetting, because that's become a cliche. That's a time-worn phrase that we all are familiar with. Those of us who grew up or speak English, we're familiar with that phrase. I don't think that I've never really, even as a kid, I didn't really agree with that. And I always kind of thought, if I forgive it, if I really forgive it, I do kind of forget it. I should be able to, on some level, forget this. And it's only been since my current husband, my husband today, taught me, I remember very early on, and I did something, I said something, I don't remember what it was, but I shouldn't have said it. So I went back 5 minutes later and I said, that didn't come out of my mouth the right way. That got lost in translation somewhere, and those words didn't match what I'm thinking. So I'm sorry about that. And he said, okay. A half an hour later, I came back to him still feeling pretty bad. And I said, I still feel really bad about what I said. And he looked at me and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I thought, are you drinking? What's in that cup? Of course. I just said the most, and he looked at me again with a blank face and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And it took him 3 or 4 times for me to get it. Oh, wow. He just forgave me. And it's as if I didn't say it. And that has been transformative for me in teaching me how to really forgive someone. It's not something someone has to continue to come back. They don't have to feel bad about it. People make mistakes, and if it's forgivable, I forgive it and we move on. Patrick, what are your thoughts about that? And then what are your thoughts, Patrick, about making forgiveness more of a mindfulness practice?
Well, I am so guilty because I'm Vietnamese, and there's a saying that us Vietnamese bring our grudges to our grave. I have been trying to move away from that stereotype. That's very toxic. But something that I want the audience at home to be mindful of is it's okay if you cannot forgive. And this may contradict again what Christian said, right? Because we mentioned this before. Forgiveness is a journey. So don't get frustrated. Please don't get frustrated. Don't get angry with yourself because you felt like, oh my God, I hear all these all these podcasts and all these webinars about forgiveness. Why can't I forgive my perpetrator? You may not be able to today, but you don't know about tomorrow. Tomorrow is a new day. It's a new chance, the new opportunity for you to navigate through that jungle that we call forgiveness, right? So I want the audience at home to watch this, but listen to our word with a grain of salt. Take it with a grain of salt. It's okay. Be kind to yourself. Be gentle to yourself, and understand that it's a journey that you are embarking upon. And the fact that you're even embarking on this forgiveness journey is amazing by itself. You don't have to have figured everything out in one day. You're not Christian. Don't pretend you're Christian. Move on. One day at a time. And that's what I want to hone in for the audience.
I really love that, Christian. I love a lot of what you say. Rather, I love that, Patrick. I love a lot of what you say. But that forgiveness being on a journey, it's being a journey, that is really powerful. And it dovetails with a lot of the journeys that we're all on. It's okay if you can't find yourself to forgive today. And frankly, with some things that have gone on in your life, it's understandable that you're struggling to forgive. But that you're even watching this video says something. So I really love that, Patrick. Love it a lot. out a video that I hadn't planned to show you guys. I want to show it to you. It's called The Freedom of Forgiveness. So let's take a look at that video. And it's a few minutes long. We'll take a look at the video and then come back and talk about it.
What a nice picture. That's me and my dad. Let me tell you a story about that young boy and his father. You see, I grew up with a single mother, which for me, unfortunately, meant that my father was not in my life consistently. Now, being the oldest of 2 children that he fathered, I took on the responsibility of protecting my family, a family that I didn't even create. Now, not having my father there affected me in negative ways because I needed that motivation and that support from a consistent male role model. Now, although my mother did an excellent job of raising 2 sons by herself, not having him there took a toll on me mentally and emotionally because I couldn't understand how a man who brought me here on this earth, he himself wasn't there for me. Now, there was this one summer when I was about 10 years old that I went to go see my dad. And what was most memorable is waking up to the screams of a woman and a man arguing, followed by a thud of a body being thrown against the wall. Being curious, me and my brother looked around to see that woman running down the hallway with no clothes on, and my father chasing her. Now imagine, if you will, going into your parents' house and not seeing any pictures of yourself on the wall or on a mantle. In my case, Tupac Shakur was on the mantle. You know, when you were young, you used to go explore in your parents' room? Well, in my dad's room, you could see leftover drugs and drugs paraphernalia. Now let's fast forward a few years. I'm an adult and I'm a father of my own. And when I entered into fatherhood, I said to myself, I'm not going to be anything like my dad. Now, in my adult years, I would go see my father from time to time. But when I went, it was with this motivation. I'm about to show you how I made it without you, but also to show you how much I missed and loved you and needed you. Now, one day I was sitting at home with my wife, and I said, you know what? I think I want to go see my dad. So she was excited because she knew that the relationship and lack thereof, how it affected me throughout the year. So she said, okay, when are we going to go? I said, no. She was confused. Little did she know, because I never told her, that the city that we stayed in for the past year, that not only did he live in the same city, but he was 20 minutes away. So we went, and as we got out the car, my father's eyes lit up as we got out and saw my family and saw my wife. So once we got inside, after a few minutes, he said, you know what? Come out on the porch. We need to talk to you. I said, okay. As we stood out there and exchanged pleasantries for a minute, he looked at his watch and he said, all right, you got 30 minutes to say what you need to say to me. I know I messed up. I looked at him, I was confused. I said to myself, was this an apology? After the years of no calls and no shows, this was an apology. Missed birthdays and football games. This really is an apology. You didn't come to my high school graduation and you missed every major milestone in my life. And this is your presentation of an apology? Needless to say, that conversation escalated. I looked at him, I said, well, after all these years, why now? He said, because I want to get to know my grandsons and be in their life. And I said, so you can do to them what you did to me and not be there? No, that ain't gonna happen. My words hurt because he fell back and he said, "Why would you say that? I'm an excellent grandfather to my other grandkids." But by that time, I didn't hear. I blocked everything out. I went into the house. I looked at my wife. I said, "You know what? It's time to go. Let's go." And we left. And that was one of the last conversations I had with my father. You see, 2 years later, I was sitting at my job. I had moved away, and I was sitting, and I received a phone call from an associate who said my father had passed away. You see, the years of hard drugs and congestive heart failure, he ended up having a heart attack. And sitting at my desk, I was confused, and I had all these emotions in me, and just the tears just streamed down my face. Tupac Shakur, who's actually my favorite artist, said in his song, "Dear Mama," as he chronicled his life without having his father, said, "It ain't nobody tell us it was fair. No love for my daddy because the coward wasn't there. He passed away and I didn't cry because my anger wouldn't let me feel for a stranger. But when I showed up the day of that funeral, I wasn't angry. I was sad. As I looked into that coffin, I didn't see a stranger. I saw my dad." So years after that, I struggled with that moment on the porch because in his way, he apologized. And I had a powerful tool I could have used, but I didn't, and it was forgiveness. The word forgive means to cease to feel all resentment from an offender. And on that day, I held on to resentment. I held on for the years of hurt. Now, I can't tell you when I had this great epiphany about when to truly forgive, but when I finally did and made peace with that, it changed my life forever. And I would take that story about me and my dad as I mentor and I talk to students. And what I found out, there is a direct correlation between unresolved issues and the lack of forgiveness. I want to do a demonstration for you. My left hand represents the person in your life. In this case, it was my dad. This paper represents the issue, no matter what that issue is. And my right represents me or you. So long as you hold resentment to a person, you are always going to be attached with that weight and that burden to that person in a negative way. But when you learn how to forgive and to release that resentment and let go, it falls away. And you're able to navigate in a much different way. Singer-songwriter India Arie, in her song, "Get It Together," says, "The choice is yours, no matter what it is. To choose life is to choose to forgive." Take a moment and think about someone in your life that you need to have a conversation with and forgive. Find it in your heart to release that resentment and to release that weight and that burden. Choose life. Choose to forgive. Thank you.
That's the kind of video that we tee up here at Brother Be Well all of the time. Resources for you, and you can find videos just like that one, as well as our independent productions at brotherbewell.com. I want to thank you for taking a second to take a look at that. Next question I've got for you guys is inner peace as it relates to forgiveness. Now, it seems to me if we're successful, we know we got to forgive. Forgiveness is for us. Christian has walked us through a couple of finite steps for getting there, and then we can incorporate it, if we're successful, in a daily mindfulness practice of sorts. We should be able to then achieve some level of inner peace. Is that accurate, Christian? And can you describe what inner peace means? What's the goal? What should we be looking for there?
That's a good question because, inner peace is subjective, right? And everyone defines it differently. So when we talk about inner peace, that's just the ability to rest within, right? That's just my personal definition. It's short and simple to understand. So sometimes the forgiver and the offender is the same person. So I'll say that one more time. Sometimes the offender and the forgiver is the same person, which is ourselves. And inner peace is when we've forgiven ourselves for the shame, right? Or the feeling like we didn't go back to school, take that job, you name it, marry the right person, let that one go by, or protect ourselves in our childhood from abuse. A lot of times in childhood abuse, we feel like we should have done something at 5 years old, which, consciously we can't. But that's another area where we think we can protect ourselves from abuse. So forgiving our past, right, allows us to have inner peace. So inner peace is a result of all the work you've done, right, to accept, understand, and deal with your trauma, and potentially, reassociate yourself, with traumatic things in the real world. So regardless of what type of treatment one goes through to deal with that trauma, it's almost inevitable they will come in contact with the smell, the sight, the visual that reminds them of the past, which is another reason why healing and inner peace is so important. Inner peace is one's ability really to be reintroduced. So it's a reintroduction to the world and have the coping skills to react appropriately. So when you see that uncle again or that dad, how do you react after knowing what he did to you, still remembering it? How do you respond? How does your body act? How does your body respond? Do you sweat? Do you break out in hives? Do you get out clear words? So those are the inner peace signs. You notice I didn't say heal all the trauma. I didn't use the word heal. And when the trauma goes away, right? Or when one no longer responds to trauma, it's because that may not be realistic. Sometimes it's not realistic. So it's the ability to coexist, not heal. It's the ability to coexist and deal with trauma when it rises. So that's really a way to look at it is, can you deal with that trauma when it real-life? Can you use those coping skills you learned in therapy? Can you realign yourself and self-soothe yourself when you're around that person, place, thing, smell, whatever it may be?
You've just reminded me, Christian, when you talk about self-soothing, you're reminding me of that teddy bear that Patrick was talking about. How can you soothe and comfort yourself? You've also reminded me of the triggers conversation that we have on this platform. We have an audio podcast, I believe, on triggers. So go to brotherbewell.com. Those are those things that you can see, smell, hear, feel that remind you of those past traumas that Christian was just talking about. So take a look or listen to that trauma triggers production on brotherbewell.com. Patrick, what do you have to say about the achievement of inner peace? What does that inner peace mean to you? Does anything Christian said resonate with you?
Shopping. Did I say it out loud? So inner peace is easier to achieve than one may think. I think I have mentioned it earlier in this podcast. The best revenge is doing well. That's my motto in life with everything. As a person of color, as a gay man, as an immigrant, I am constantly being undermined. And prior to many years of schooling, the ability to speak the language, put me in a position where I'm constantly undermined. And I just learned over the year, especially with therapy, that I just have to work on myself, right? A lot of times, a lot of this pain and trauma that we have discussed in this podcast, in many instances, are by the people that we love the most. Our family, our parents, our partner, whomever. And I have learned that now that I am older, if I am able to work on myself and get myself to a place where I am at peace with who I am, with what I'm doing, with the direction in life that I'm heading, then those people can no longer hurt me. I think that's the most important thing for myself in terms of achieving that inner peace. Because when you were little, you have zero control about your environment. You have zero control how other people treat you or, physically or emotionally or psychologically abuse you. But when you're older, you are able to set boundaries. And with boundaries, with powerful, concrete boundaries, come with inner peace. Because when you set those boundaries, it's like a line in the sand. You cross that line, you're out. See ya. You do not have to associate yourself with those people who hurt you or want to hurt you. And as an adult, if you learn about those boundaries and know how to set the boundaries, the inner peace will.
You just very well may have given us your final thoughts on this topic of forgiveness, Patrick. But while you got the floor, I'm going to give it to you before we turn things over to our licensed marriage and family therapist, Christian Jacobs. So, Patrick, final thoughts on the power of forgiveness.
The final thoughts. I think I have mentioned it before during the podcast, is that ability to navigate through your life with grace and, carry that teddy bear in your arm, that younger self in your arm, and tell them that everything's going to be okay, and doing your best to live your best life, every day improving yourself. The only person you're competing with is yourself. Competing with yourself every day. Tomorrow, I will be a better version of Patrick. And by doing well, you in turn getting the best revenge on whatever pain, trauma that was inflicted upon you. And I can't emphasize it enough for the audience at home. It's okay for you not to be where you want to be on your journey to forgiveness. It's okay, one day at a time. Nobody has the ability to just wake up and have the enlightenment they need to forgive whoever the perpetrator that inflicted trauma in their life. It takes time, it takes effort, and you have to consciously working on your forgiveness. Just like Christian mentioned, mindful forgiveness. Make it mindful, make it a conscious effort, and learn the tools you need in order to achieve, where you want to be in your forgiveness journey.
I really appreciate that, Patrick. I'm going to make mine really brief before we turn things back over to you, Christian, for your final thoughts on this topic. For me, I think even one of my takeaways from this conversation, and I knew it before, but you guys helped drive it home, forgiveness is really for ourselves. It's for me. So those situations I just told you about, it gets back to self-love for me. I learned to love myself a long time ago. So do I love myself enough to give myself the gift of forgiveness? The answer to that is yes. And I'm going to take some of the skills and tips that we learned today to achieve that in my life in times when I really haven't. And then I'm also going to pat myself on the back for the times that I have. The times when someone has really wronged me and I was able to say, hey, I forgive you. That doesn't mean that we're going to reconcile. And we didn't touch on that a lot. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two very, very different things. But in my mind and in my heart, I've forgiven you. We can move on. Christian, give us your final thoughts as a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Sure. You all stole my thunder, so I'm searching in my mind for my third. And but those are both great points that you all brought up. And I think I'll go on a clinical level. I'll go on the clinical perspective or the physical health perspective, because this is what people don't think of when they're in their feelings, right? They're not thinking of how it's affecting them physically. So I just like folks listening would understand that unforgiveness impacts our physical as well. It's a holistic impact. It's not just the grudge you're going to get back, or the revenge, or being angry at someone and getting back up at them. That is impacting you physically. It is causing things to happen internally in your body that you're not aware of. And thus, it will come out and manifest in different ways. Not just the mind. So unforgiveness usually causes disappointment, right? Shame, anger. These are things the brothers and sisters of unforgiveness. It's shame, it's anger, it's resentment, it's rage, judgment, being highly critical of others, rejecting individuals, fear in a person, it affects your relationship with other people, your ability to connect with other people and be in healthy relationships. And as a result, our bodies produce, again, high amounts of stress hormones that impact our part of the brain that helps us make decisions. So that's one of the main things. And also, here's another one. It impacts our memory as well. Isn't that something? So it can eventually impact your memory and the ability to reduce serotonin, which impacts your memory, which makes you feel pain more, anger more, which can lead to being depressed. So it's a chain effect. It's a snowball effect from the top to the bottom. So those are just a few areas, and there's other areas with your immune system and cardiovascular that we don't have time to get into, but just know that it's a holistic impact negatively on your body, and don't forget.
thank you for that. I want to thank both of you guys. We're just about out of time. Christian Jacobs, licensed marriage and family therapist, Brother Be Well clinical advisor. Christian, so much of our work over the last few years would not have been possible without you. So I want to thank you for that, all that work, and especially for today.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I appreciate it. The pleasure has been mine.
And also Patrick Ma, my little bro, he's a physician assistant, also a clinical advisor to us here at Brother Be Well. Thank you, Brother Patrick.
Always, Michael. It's my pleasure.
And I want to thank you for watching this video. This one is brought to you by Blue Shield of California's BlueSky initiative. You can find out all about that BlueSky initiative at this website. We'll get it up for you. It's bluesky.blueshieldca.com. That's bluesky.blueshieldca.com. We want to thank them for their support. I'll give you another website really quickly, if I could, brotherbewell.com. That's ours. We referenced it a few times today. But if you've seen or heard anything that you enjoy today and you want to learn a little bit more, go to that website. If you want to learn about a variety of behavioral health topics, go to that website. We're a membership-supported service, but memberships are free. Sign up right now. You'll be our next new member. And while you're there, give us your email address, sign up for our blog, and then when videos just like this one go live, you'll be among the first to know about it. So take care of all of that, if you would, at brotherbewell.com. My name again, Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you again for being with us. Do me 2 quick favors until I get to see you next time. Take great care of yourself. And then the next one's easy once you do that. Take great care of somebody else. Till next time, bye-bye.